Testing, 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 testing. All right. Uh, Now I think we got the audio fixed. Awesome. Cool, cool, cool. So I'll just like run through real briefly. I'll be going through homework 2 from Hamel and Shreya's AI Evals course. And so I already did homework 1, but it's very straightforward. But just wanted to show you kind of like the setup that they have. So basically, this repo where all the homeworks are, there's a project that is a recipe chatbot. It has a backend and a simple front end that's just like this chatbot that I'll show you once I share my screen. Asked the chatbot to give me a recipe for chicken and dumplings, and then it outputs this whole thing. So cool, makes sense. The first homework was really about just writing a system prompt so that we kind of get a structured recipe and also adding a few sample queries. And so there's this sample queries file where we have, oh, I think this is not, let me reshare the right thing. Here we go. So I have a file that has all of the queries in it that we're going to run evals against, and there's a script to actually run the evals. So what we'll do in homework 2 is 2 things. One is synthetic data generation to get some queries, and then the second thing is error analysis. I'm just going to say very high level what the process is going to be. And this is all content from Hamel and Shreya's course, so if this seems interesting, you should definitely sign up for the next cohort. But the first thing that we do is we want to identify key dimensions that we want the queries to cover. And this is really just to help the synthetic data generation make diverse queries. If you just ask an LLM to make you 100 queries, it tends to make a lot of repetitive queries and queries that kind of look the same. And you want to make sure you have variation across core dimensions that you care about in your product. And so for this recipe bot, that might be the type of cuisine, the dietary restriction, or meal type. And then you want to generate a bunch of unique combinations of those. So for instance, I might want to have an Indian vegan breakfast. And so that might be one setting of those 3 variables. And then you basically sample a bunch of those combinations. And so the reality is, like, you don't need to get exhaustive here because we're just trying to get good coverage. And if you were exhaustive, this tends to blow up very quickly. So every new dimension you add, there's exponentially more data you can have to cover it. Last thing that we'll do for synthetic data generation really is now just generate the queries. There's a note here to review the generated queries to make sure they're realistic. The reality is that the LLM might generate queries that don't look like what a user would ever ask, and you want to make sure that they're queries you actually want to use to evaluate your main AI system. When we get into error analysis, we're going to do a bunch of things. This README has language that is from the literature and it's academic. So I just want to say like what the process is like in plain English. So the first thing we're going to do is just run the bot against our queries and generate traces. And so those will be traces we can go back and look at and annotate. And then we're going to do free text notes, basically. So the second step, open coding, is really just looking at it and taking notes on it. Take notes on anything you notice, anything you like, anything you don't like. After you've done that, a bunch of traces that have notes, and you know, as a generally intelligent human, have probably noticed some patterns. And so you can now take those notes and put them into a error taxonomy. And so that's really just define, hey, what are the common error modes that I see? And then you can go back and tag all of your examples with those error modes that you created. And then it says optionally, you can create a spreadsheet for that analysis. I don't know what we're going to do for that yet, but cool. Let's get started on this. So let's start with identifying the key dimensions that we care about. I think the key dimensions that I most care about in something like this, I think cuisine type is definitely one, and meal type is definitely one. I don't really have any dietary restrictions, so I don't care personally too much for that. But I think I probably care a lot about how long the recipe takes to make. I don't want to spend a lot of time cooking for a lot of meals. And so sometimes I have a time restriction. And so really what I am kind of thinking is we'll just roll with cuisine type, something about how long, and then the meal type. And I think that'll give us some good dimensions to go over. And so we want to list at least 3 example values for each one. And the reason we want to do this is largely because when we're generating unique combinations, we're going to be using an LLM to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new file. I'll call it just synth data gen. We'll go ahead and open that. You already know that I am a Miroscope fanboy, so we're going to use Miroscope. So I'm going to go ahead and add that into my dependencies. Cool. So first thing I'm going to do is basically just define our dimensions. And I know that probably I'm going to need this, so I'll kind of import that now. So we'll think of the dimensions that we're going to have. And so we said cuisine. We said meal type. And we also said cooking time. And so each of these, we're going to have a variety of different values it could possibly take. But we can really just let the LLM handle that. And so really, I think what I might think about doing here is really just creating a pedantic base model just to structure the data that I'm going to have. And then I'll insert it into the LLM call. And that'll like decouple the dimensions I have from the actual generation of the values. So we'll say pedantic import base model. And so I'll define a dimension. And then want the name. I don't want to specify the values. I'm just going to let the LLM handle that. But what I'll basically say is, I might have a description for it. And then also I'll have examples. And so very simple thing. And so now I can do something like this, where I say dimension, and then I can give it cuisine, type of cuisine, and so love this fancy autocomplete we have these days where I don't have to think too much about it. But so meal type, and then I'm going to want cooking time. I'm just going to remove this. Cool. So now I have like my dimensions defined here. So now I'm going to go ahead and create an LLM function using llm.call from Miroscope. And I'm going to go ahead and use OpenAI and GPT-4o Mini. And I'll say generate recipe dimensions and do this. And the other thing that we can do is add a prompt template. For those of you who aren't familiar with Miroscope, Miroscope makes it pretty easy to define AI functions. I particularly like it. I think the interface is like pretty clean and easy to use. But basically, this at llm.call decorator allows me to specify the model. And I can even specify a structured output, which I am going to do because in this case, we really want a list of like settings for those dimensions. And so I might say something like class dimension tuple, since tuple is the term used in the course. And so then we can have something that sets all of these. And we can even give it fields. So we have descriptions, and that will help the generation process. And in this call decorator, we can say response model equals dimension tuple. This means it'll be forced to generate one. We kind of want it to generate multiple. So let's go ahead and just make the response model list. And I actually probably prefer this to be like this. So I'm going to use chain of thought just so it thinks through what it's going to create. And then I'll add the tuples. And then we can make this dimension tuples. Cool. So now I've kind of like defined an AI call that ultimately is going to return this type to me. And I can use this prompt template decorator to write the prompt. And so really, I just need a system prompt here. So I'm not even going to bother like making separate system and user prompts. So I'll say something like, please generate a list of dimension tuples for the following dimensions. For the following dimensions. And then I might say, use as much variety as possible. And then I'll say, generate at least 20 tuples. So we can do something like that. And then So now I have something here where I can like generate the tuples. And so probably want to like just pause here and see, does this work the way we expect it? And so what I might do here is say result equals, print out the reasoning, and then I would probably do for item and result dot tuples, print item. Cool. So now we have something that we can run. And so just to kind of like run through what we expect to happen, I expect there to be some reasoning here since I'm using chain of thought. And then really, I just expect there to be at least 20 items. And so maybe I would actually like enumerate over this and print this so we can actually pretty easily see the number. And so I think this is probably fine. And so actually, we probably want to do model dump JSON just to make that cleaner. But yeah, now we can go ahead and run this with uv run synth data gen.py and see what happens. Base model init takes one positional argument, but 4 were given. Let's see, what did I do here? So, I think I need to. And then, all right, I think I just needed to state the names of the fields that I was using. The dangers of vibe coding. And so now we can see we got 20, just like we wanted. We can see some of the options. So Mexican breakfast in 15 minutes, an Italian lunch in 30 minutes, Japanese dinner in 1 hour. So we see there's actually a lot of variation here, which is cool. That's what we wanted. And so I think that that's probably pretty good. So coming back to the homework, after identifying the key dimension and generating 15 to 20 unique combinations, now we want to generate natural user queries. So it says write a second prompt for an LLM to take 5 to 7 of the generated tuples and create a natural language user query for your recipe bot for each selected tuple. So now we can basically create another function. And we'll say query for the response model because we're going to want to generate a query. And again, I usually just like to add a reasoning field, so we're always doing chain of thought. So now we want to generate a query, but we want to generate it based on the following dimensions. We don't want to generate multiple queries necessarily. And so I'm usually of the opinion that you should not go too ham on your prompts early on. There's a lot of people that follow really good practices on like a prompt should contain a role, instructions, blah 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 blah. I typically think that prompts are a really messy abstraction, and so you should always just do things in eval driven way. Start with the simplest thing, and then see where it doesn't work. So you're not adding extraneous stuff into your prompt. So the first thing that we need to give this call is the dimensions that we have, because this is what describes what the dimensions are. And so that'll help it understand. And then make sure the query adheres to the following dimension values. And then we can basically add in the dimension tuple here. Cool. And so this is a case where where we probably want to have a separate system and user prompt. So I would probably do this system, and then here so I'll say, I'm going to change this language a little bit. Generate a query and the other thing that I'll probably say is use language that a real person would use in all query generation. Simple words, short queries, and probably something, I want to say something about sometimes lacking capitalization and punctuation. Cool. And so this is also showing off kind of like a neat ergonomics thing of prompt template. You can basically, in line in this prompt template, you can specify system and user messages. So it makes it pretty easy to make a general prompt template. So now I have something to generate a query. So I'm now just going to run this on one. Well, actually, I guess I don't need to run it on just one thing. So we're going to move this down. So now we're printing out the tuple that we generated, and then we'll generate a query and then print the query. But I'm also going to just like add a tab in here, just because that'll make it visually look right. And then I'm also, just because I don't want to run a bunch right now, I'm going to say, if I is greater than 5, break. And so that way we just generate it for the first few. And so we can take a look at whether they look reasonable. And if so, we can run it on everything and get all of our queries. But if they look unreasonable, maybe we need to go back and fix the prompt. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. See what happens. And so on the note of LLMs generating things that are kind of repetitive, I just want to point out, like, look at these first two queries. I want a quick and easy recipe for breakfast that has a Mexican flavor. It should only take 15 minutes to prepare and cook. And the next one, I want to find an easy Italian recipe that's suitable for lunch and takes 30 minutes to prepare. The structure of these two queries is very similar. And that's kind of what you want to avoid, because then you might be in a situation where the variation doesn't match what you see in real data. And you don't want to optimize your AI system against queries that users would never ask. You want to make sure it's representative of like the real kind of stuff you would see. So looking for a recipe that fits a Japanese dinner and takes about an hour to cook. Oh, actually, I should have done this actually, because I think what I was actually reading that was repetitive was the reasoning field. Let me make this clear. Mexican breakfast recipe in 15 minutes, Italian lunch recipe in 30 minutes, Japanese dinner recipe in 1 hour. So notice how these are super repetitive. So these are like not things that I actually want to put through. And so I actually want to go back and, add some things. um, based on the following dimensions and following all instructions. So I'm going to add some instructions to help nudge it in the right direction. And then I'm also going to add some examples. That way we can show some variation. So we can go ahead and say, use as much variety in query structure as possible. And sometimes it helps to generate a bunch at one time. And so that could be one thing we do to help fix it. That way, instead of each query generation being an independent call, where it doesn't really have the state of what it is producing in other ones, we could basically batch it up and have it generate a bunch. So that's definitely an option that we might look at if this doesn't work. Vary whether to capitalize or punctuate. Vary the order of the dimensions in the query. Vary the words used. You do not need to use the exact word from the dimension tuples. And then use simple language. Average user reads at a 6th grade level. Wow. Cursor wanted me to put 4th grade level. Thinks my users are dumb. And then, is there anything else in this? I think I got all of this. So I might do something like I am craving Mexican food. I'm not sure what to make for dinner in 30 minutes. So notice like this is a very different structure from the types of queries it was generating. And so I might also say, I'm in a rush. I'm in a rush and need to make something quick for lunch. Any Indian dishes? A light breakfast. So I might say like, help me cook a healthy breakfast for my amazing wife. I can spend at least 2 hours and she likes European food. So now I got a few examples in here. So that might help it generate queries that are, more than just Italian lunch recipe in 30 minutes, which, may or may not be how our users talk. I'm going to assume not, just because it's too simple. So now that we have that, we can go ahead and run this and see what kinds of queries we get now. All right. So now I got these queries. So let's see. Can I get a 15-minute Mexican breakfast recipe? Can you suggest an Italian recipe I can make for lunch that takes about 30 minutes? Can you suggest a Japanese dish for dinner that I can make in an hour? I'm looking for a delicious Indian breakfast recipe that I can prepare in about 2 hours. So I'm still not satisfied with this, with the variation here. So probably my next thing to do would be to actually make this a list. And then instead of having it generate one query, I'm going to have it generate multiple. So I'm going to do something here that is actually another cool thing that Miroscope offers. But basically, I might want to generate multiple queries, but I want to make sure that the number of queries are the same as the number of dimensions or tuples that I passed in. And so what I'm going to do here is put dimension tuples. And then I'm going to make this an annotated field. Which is a list of dimension tuples. And then I'm going to use this thing called from call args from Miroscope. And so let me go ahead and import some of the things that I need. This is wrong. So basically, by using this from call args annotation, this tells Miroscope, don't have the LLM generate this field, pull it from the arguments that are passed in. And so notice on my call, I have a field called dimension tuples. And so basically this is going to get matched by name to this. And so now all my output will have this in it. And the reason you might want to do that is because now I'm going to write a validator. So now I can write a model validator, and then, oops, I had to generate too much code. But basically, I just want to assert that the length of the dimension tuples is the length of queries. And actually, because you might have these turned off, there we go. So, and then now I need to import model validator. So now I can generate multiple queries at once. And again, the reason I might want to do that is because then a single LLM call has state across all of the queries that it's generating. And that way, when I tell it to vary the queries, it actually can see the other queries that it generated. And so this can help sometimes. What I also find helpful to do is basically to specify, sometimes it's hard to, for the LLM to figure out exactly how many things it has to output. And its ability to do that gets worse. And so another thing that I kind of like to do here is to use computed fields in Miroscope. So I can add computed fields by just returning a dictionary here. And I'm going to say num queries, and then return length of dimension tuples. And now this is a variable I can use in my prompt. And so I'll say generate a query for each dimension tuple. Generate exactly num queries, and that way I can tell the LLM how many it's generating. And then update that. And so now I've gone through and added a bunch of things. Notice I have a validator here, so it is possible that this can fail now. I'm hopeful it won't, because we're just going to do it with like 5, but it could. And so if you've looked at my effective AI engineering tips, there is a tip to handle this kind of exact case, and there's some notes on how to do it in the Miroscope docs. But let's go ahead and update our code here to use the changes we made. So now I can't just run it one by one. So basically what I'm going to do is generate a query response. Generate query result.tuples, and then I'm just going to take the first 5, and then we can go through and do that. The one thing I'm going to change, just because I feel anal about it, I'm going to make this plural because we're generating multiple queries now. And so now we can print this out. What I actually want to print, though, so let's see. I kind of want to do tuple query. Let me call this like tuple query. And so I'm going to zip the dimension tuples with the queries. And then I'm going to go ahead and print this. And this way we can see what the query was, and then we can also see like what were the dimensions it was trying to go for. So let's go ahead and run this now. Let's see what we get. The request takes a little bit longer because we're not doing it one by one. And again, if you haven't read my articles, the latency of an LLM call is highly related to its how many output tokens it's generating. So we got some validation errors. So this means that we're not returning in the correct thing. And the issue is with the dimension tuples. And I think, let me double check that I'm calling this right. Oh, oops. First of all, let me 5. So this should actually be it's interesting that this is having an issue with dimension tuples. I think I accidentally used dimension tuples instead of dimension tuple. So that was the issue. Okay. All right, validation error for query response. Let's see what the validation error is. So we're getting one validation error for query response. So the number of dimension tuples didn't match the number of queries. So like I said, this is a case where this can fail because the AI is basically allowed to output whatever it wants here. And so some of it might be because it might be getting confused about this and might think that it only needs to output one thing. And so I might say, look at the example queries below. Inspiration. The other thing I want to check is if there's like something. So I say, please generate a query. That's probably problematic. So it might think it only needs to output one. Please generate queries based on the following. Cool. each generate exactly. Okay, so we got that. And so here, I'm going to actually also add the the number of queries. This way, when we see the error, we can see how many things were expected and how many things were actually generated. Now fixing the prompt, now we're getting it. So looking for a quick Mexican recipe for breakfast I can make in 15 minutes. Can you suggest a 15-minute Mexican breakfast? So this is interesting because these are basically the same query. And this one is not adhering to this. So that's problematic. 2, I want to whip up a simple Mexican breakfast. So this is really just anchoring in to like generating the same query over and over again. And so it may be that, you know, and actually I should check the cuisine Mexican breakfast, cooking time 15 minutes. So maybe the way that this is basically comes out, we're not doing anything to um, render this in some way that might be useful. So one thing we can do is basically um, do something like rendered dimension tuples. And so we might want to do like a model dump JSON for each thing. But then what I also might want to do is now basically put these inside of an XML format, and that way it's clearer for the LLM that this is like a separate example. And then I can, you know, basically join this with a new line. And then I can basically say render dimension tuples. And then here, render dimension tuples. And then I want to make sure generate one query for each dimension tuple. Cool. So now hopefully that's a little bit clearer. This kind of showcases why you need to go and look at the queries. It's sometimes kind of complicated to get the variation that you want. And so definitely you don't want to just let the AI handle it and then look at it. Cool. So we're getting, so it's only generating one query. These things are non-deterministic. So it could be that this is like a transient issue. So we should try to run it again. If you kind of keep getting that same validation error, probably what it means is that there's something with the instructions that's getting confused on. And so now we're seeing, hey, number dimension tuples must match our query. So we're continually like outputting one query. And so for each dimension tuple, there are this many dimension tuples. And then it might be, you know, helpful down here to put these instructions again. These are the kind of hacks you often find yourself doing with, you know, manually writing your prompts. Mhm, 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 mhm. Okay, so we're still. Mm-mm. So this is a case where I want to double check that this is what I think it should be. So one thing I really like to use is IPython debugger. And so I can just add this import IPDB and IPDB set trace. And then now when I run this, this is now like a breakpoint. And so once execution hits that, I'll have like a debugger and I can inspect values and just double check. Because I am saying that, you should generate exactly this many queries. And then also here's the rendered dimension tuples. I just want to double check what rendered dimension tuples looks like to make sure um, it's what I kind of expect. Um, Actually, let me print it so I see what it looks like. Hmm, this is definitely what I would expect. So one thing I might do here then um, is make a type query, and basically I can add a reasoning field, but I can also ask it to keep track. Um, so I'll say something like, I'll say how many queries have been generated. And the idea here is to kind of force the LLM to keep track of how many queries it's generated. And so hopefully that's, something with the with the LLM, it'll help it to output the number it's supposed to. And so then we'll just change this to be that. And then down here where I print, I'll remove the duplication here. Also take out the debugger. And then here, I'm going to want to output this query. Let's see what happens with those changes. We're still only outputting one query for some reason, which is very interesting. I wonder if it's this. Um, This is one of the challenges with basically going from returning one to returning many. You often have like a lot of little things that refer to generating one query, and it's really hard to kind of control exactly what the process attends to. And I think this is one of those things that's like a good argument for frameworks like DSPy. Mm, mm, mm. All right, so I think I removed the bits that were kind of referring to generating one query. So it's still just generating one query. So maybe I'll say num queries left, and then I want to output down here the entire thing. Mm-mm. All right, 87th time's the charm. Mhm. Mhm. Okay, so I just realized I need to remove this validation right now because otherwise I don't get the output and I can't inspect it. So this is interesting because it recognizes it has four more queries left to generate and it just doesn't generate them. Hmm. So I might say if there are still queries left to generate, keep generating queries. So while it's generating, I'm going to look for. Wow, that's interesting. Now that I said if there are more queries to generate, keep generating queries, it just doesn't generate whether there are queries left. That's fascinating. LLMs are very interesting. What the heck? Yeah. So I'm not quite sure how to get this to generate. I wonder if I just still have like, maybe I just need to make sure I am not using the word query anywhere. All right. All right. Let's try this. And if this doesn't work, I'm just going to shift over to generating one by one, but I'll pass in previously generated queries as a way to have that context. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure what in my prompt is kind of goading it into only generating one query. So, mhm. We don't need that anymore. Query response. Actually, don't even need this. Remove the validation. Update the response model. So we'll say, please generate a query based on the following dimensions and following all instructions. Use a much variety. Example queries, user generate one query for the following dimension tuple. Vary the query with respect to previous queries. So dimension tuple, so change this back to 1. And we will go ahead and add previous queries. Cool. So we have all of that in there now. So we have previous queries. We're just going to make this a list of string though. And then so now we'll go through. Oh, actually, let's basically want to go through the and we'll say queries. Okay, so now what we're doing here, going back to generating one by one, but just passing in the previously generated queries. And that way we can still have that sort of state. And so we want to make sure that we are, no, we want this to be the query. And then we're just keeping track of the queries that we generate each time. And we're going to want to print the item here, and then we'll say, there we go. Cool. So back to a similar-ish thing we had before. So we also want to make sure that we don't go on for the whole thing. That way we can just spot check a few. And now I'm starting to see some of the variation I wanted to. Can you suggest a Mexican recipe that I can make in 15 minutes? What Italian dish can I whip up for lunch in half an hour? I'm planning dinner. I want to cook something Japanese. Got any ideas that'll take around 1 hour? So the only thing I might say about this is that the order of the things is still pretty like it's always cuisine, meal type, time. So, um, but I think we're getting decent variation here. So definitely this is a point where I would now run it for all. And probably what I want to do is just print out all the queries at the very end. And this will kind of make it easy for me to copy and paste it um, into the data set so we can run it. So with that, we're done with the synthetic data generation part. Now we can get into the somewhat fun part. So once this finishes, what we're going to do is basically go and add the queries that are generated into the sample data set that we have of queries. And we're going to go ahead and run run the bot against all these queries. So we're going to want to add our IDs into this. So now I got 35 queries. So it's pretty good. Now we can jump in, and now that we have a bunch of queries, we can go and do our error analysis. So I'm going to do this in a spreadsheet. So the first thing I'm going to do is run the this testing script. I don't remember where it is though. UV run scripts. There we go. So there's a bulk test.py, and this is just going to run all the queries. And then it outputs a file at the end that's a CSV that kind of has all the things we need. So now we're going to go through and submit these queries. So you can see it basically is outputting everything. And so now everything's been put into this file. And so I'm going to just like create a spreadsheet real quick in Google Drive, and then we'll kind of like go through it. So let me create a Google Sheet. And then cool. And so I'll go ahead and import the file. And so this is going to be like here in the projects, recipe chatbot. And then there's like is it an annotation? Oh, no, it's in results. So open this. So yeah, I want to replace the spreadsheet. I don't want it to convert anything just in case there's something fishy in there. But now we have ID, query, and response. And so I'm just going to do some stuff here just to make it nicer to look at. And then get text wrapping in. And notice how these are all kind of out of order, which is kind of annoying to me, but it's whatever, I guess. So again, we're going to do that open coding thing, which is really just taking notes. So I'm just going to add this note column, bold all of these, and we can start to just like run through and look at what things we notice. So the first thing we have, I threw in a query that was basically not about um, a recipe at all, just to see if it would do the right thing. And the response is, I'm here to help with recipe and cooking tips. Let me know if you like a delicious recipe or cooking advice. So good, this refuses the request. So I don't have anything more to say. Here's one where I say, my doctor says I need to get more vitamin C. And so we see it recommends a recipe that has citrus in it, which is high in vitamin C. So that makes sense. Tablespoon of honey, a few fresh mint leaves, all the pith. So looking at this, I am not seeing anything that I hate here. I think the markdown is kind of the structure that I want. The ingredients are there. The instructions are simple and clear. So I think this is pretty easy. The one thing that I would say is missing, perhaps, is the number of servings. So, so, oh, why is this not letting me edit? So there we go. Good recipe for query, but maybe need to have clearer specification of number of servings. Instructions, ingredients are clear. We'll go ahead and also text wrap this so we can. Next thing, suggest a quick vegan breakfast recipe. So avocado toast with tomato and basil. Simple, nutritious, delicious vegan breakfast. One thing that I think is going to be interesting is, we have this dimension of, the meal type, but it's kind of funny to think about what it means to adhere to that because, is breakfast a type of food or is it just something you eat at a like certain part of the day? Um, and especially as we go across cuisines, there might be cuisines that I'm just like not familiar with. Um, I'm also noticing these don't have like how long it takes to cook. So missing how long it takes to cook and prepare. That's probably important, especially because that's like one of our dimensions. So, pretty much seeing same sort of things here where I don't like how with like olive oil in particular and lemon juice, it doesn't tell us exactly how much. I guess lemon juice, it tells us just a squeeze, but I don't like that it doesn't tell us how much olive oil. Does it say it in the instructions? It says a small amount of olive oil for extra flavor. So, good recipe selection, but I want num servings and prep/cook time front and center. And then also should have measurement for all ingredients. I am not a good cook, so I feel like I'm not qualified to review whether the instructions are correct. I'm going to scan over them to make sure they reasonably make sense. A masala omelet for delicious for breakfast with Indian flavors. So flavorful Indian inspired omelet. So 4 large eggs, 1 small onion finely chopped, 1 small tomato, 1 green chili finely chopped, 1 tablespoon of fresh coriander leaves. One thing I don't like is it doesn't really tell us what kind of chili, and I don't know if that's important, but I'm just going to note it down. And again, when you're doing like this open coding exercise, really just write down anything that comes to mind, anything you notice. You're really just trying to extract out all of the things that you notice, and that's going to help you get very granular about what you actually care about in responses. Um, so the ingredients here seem good. Um, so also issue with prep, cook time, and servings, not front center. So that same issue across all of them. So crack the eggs into a bowl, whisk them well until fully blended. Add the chopped onion, tomato, and green chili, chopped coriander, turmeric, and salt into the eggs. Mix everything together until combined. Non-stick and hot over medium heat. Cook for about 2 to 3 minutes until the edges are delicious again. Cook the element using a spatula. Cook the other side for 2 minutes. Cut in half quarters. Serve with hot toast or Indian bread. Should the toast or Indian bread be part of ingredients? I think so, because that's like what's making the full meal experience. So I think that makes sense to include that in the ingredients. I would really hate to look at the ingredients, go to the store, buy all these things, and then get to the end of this and be like, dang, I didn't get any toast or like Indian bread or something. I need a light breakfast, low on the glycemic index, high in protein. Also needs to have at least 9 grams of fat so I can take my fat soluble vitamins. That is a very, very targeted query for me. So smoked salmon and avocado toast. So avocado gives you your healthy fats. Smoked salmon, very high in protein. So 2 slices of whole grain or sprouted grain bread, 2 ounces smoked salmon, 1 ripe avocado, 1 tablespoon of cream cheese or Greek yogurt, fresh dill or chives, lemon wedge, optional, and salt and pepper taste. This actually sounds so good. I want to make it right now. Just nailed it for me, at least. Again, we have the issue of prep cook time and servings. It's probably just going to be an issue throughout all of them. I must not have anything in the prompt that specifies that. So toast slices, while the bread's toasting, cut the avocado. I really like how it's interleaving steps. I love how it's interleaving steps, doing some prep in between cooking. I think those are like particularly good instructions. So yeah, overall, I'm a big fan of this. So we've gone through like 5 examples now. So, and we've probably taken like 10 minutes. So we're spending 2 minutes or so on each example. The reality is, if you want to build good AI systems, a lot of it is this: just going through and writing down what you see, and that is either good or bad depending on what you are willing to do. Almost nobody's willing to do this kind of work, and it's so high leverage that if you're willing to do it, you can become better than almost anybody. So next query, I'm in the mood for a Spanish breakfast that I can make in just 15 minutes. So tortilla española, Spanish omelet. Classic Spanish breakfast. So one thing I want to point out is we've now had 2 cuisines, 2 different cuisines for breakfast. Basically gave cuisine omelet as the recipe. I don't know whether that's bad or not, but we might want some variety. Like, I'm not very familiar with like what different cuisines would have for breakfast specifically, but I would really like to get recipes that are like, what is the traditional thing that that cuisine would have for breakfast, rather than just having a omelet styled after that cuisine. If that makes sense. Again, prep cook time, num servings is an issue. 4 large eggs, 2 medium potatoes, an onion, 2 tablespoons salt, taste, black pepper. And like when I read this, it's like doesn't even feel like there's anything um, Spanish about this. It just sounds like a very simple omelet. Um, I think the thing at the very end, um, I think the instructions here like mention a tortilla, and I don't know if it's like calling the omelet a tortilla, because you're pouring the beaten eggs over the potatoes and onions. Cook on low heat. When the edges are set, carefully flip the tortilla over. So I'll say instructions mention a tortilla, but I think that's confusing because no tortillas in recipe. Maybe it's the omelet they are referring to. So some other issues in there. I would also say that I'm not sure you can make this in 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. But maybe that's okay. What can I quickly make for an Ethiopian breakfast that won't take more than 15 minutes? Okay, so kind of to my earlier comment, this seems to be um, fine. I'm also noticing a lot of queries about breakfast though, and I'm hoping there's okay. So the next one's lunch. Cool. So I like that this is a non-omelet breakfast. I'm realizing I can't spell omelet, and so prep cook time and num servings obviously going to be an issue. I'm going to stop even writing down the thing on prep and cook time because it's probably a problem with all of them. And this is something where it's such a big, obvious problem that I might as well just go fix it in the prompt. So let's see. Hearty protein-packed Ethiopian breakfast with fava beans, seasoned with spices. So 15 minutes. I'm a little skeptical you can do this, but maybe. So a can of fava beans, 1 small onion, clove garlic, tomato, tablespoon of olive, teaspoon of beer spice, flatbread for serving, skillet. Okay, this seems fine, straightforward to me. An Italian dish I can make for lunch that takes only 30 minutes. Spaghetti aglio e olio. I can't pronounce that. Simple pasta dish. So 200 grams of spaghetti, 4 cloves of garlic. Garlic. Wow, I can't talk. Extra virgin olive oil. So a lot of other stuff. Once. Okay. Da, 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 da. So about 10 minutes cooking. And then while the pasta cooks, again, love interleaved prep and cooking steps. I really like to save time. Careful not to burn it. If using chili flakes, add them. Drain the cooked pasta, reserving pasta water, blah, blah, blah. Toss well to coat the pasta evenly. If the mixture seems dry, add a splash of the reserved pasta. Stir in chopped parsley. Serve immediately with grated Parmesan cheese on top, if desired. And I'll also here, I again, I like all ingredients to have measurements. And this is because, when I want to make a dish, I'm going to look at the ingredients and then I'm going to go buy stuff. And I feel like it adds extra cognitive overhead to have to think about how much to get. Um, I would prefer if the grated Parmesan cheese just, had a measurement, even if it's just a number pulled out of the thin air. All right, next query. Can you give me an American recipe that I can make for lunch in half an hour? So, classic chicken sandwich, quick and satisfying American classic, perfect for lunch. You can prepare in just half an hour. Okay, so 2 boneless, skinless chicken breasts, salt and pepper, teaspoon of paprika, 4 slices of red, white, or whole wheat, 2 lettuce leaves, a sliced tomato, small red onion sliced, 2 tablespoons of mayonnaise, Dijon mustard, tablespoon butter. Medium high heat, seasoned chicken breasts. Drizzle olive oil over the chicken, rub it evenly. Place the chicken breast in the hot grill, 6 to 7 minutes on each side until fully cooked and juices run clear. Um, so it might be good for less experienced cooks to say what fully cooked means, e.g., what internal temp should chicken be? And that comes from my own experience of always being paranoid that I haven't cooked chicken properly. Remove the chicken from the grill, rest a couple minutes, slice it into thinner strips, and spread the mayo. So one thing I'm trying to find here. Okay, cool. So I was looking for where we talked about toasting the bread, which should be there. So seems good. All right, I have bananas that are getting too ripe. What can I make? Banana pancakes. Flip the banana pancakes. So 2 ripe bananas, 1 cup all-purpose flour, 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, half teaspoon of baking soda, half teaspoon of salt, egg, a large optional nuts, chocolate chips, or cinnamon for extra flavor. In a separate bowl, whisk together the flour, blah, blah, blah. Pour the milk into the mashed bananas and add the egg. Whisk until well combined. Melt the butter or oil into the banana mixture and stir. Gradually add the dry ingredients into the wet mixture, stirring gently until just combined. Don't overmix. Okay. Does this have syrup on it? So again, this has the problem with accompaniments syrup, not mentioned in ingredients. And then the other thing I'll say is the optional ingredients for flavor are not mentioned in instructions. So it's clear to me where oh, actually, never mind. It's right there, 6. Wow, this thing is better than I expected. Cool. So we've been on a live stream for almost 90 minutes. So maybe I'll go through and just rate one more, and then talk about what the next steps would be. But I think this is basically the essence of the homework. So what can I whip up for a tasty Mexican breakfast in just 15 minutes? I'm also going to make a note about the query here. I feel like we have had this query already. Maybe need to fix synth data gen. Quick and flavorful Mexican inspired breakfast. So breakfast tacos. So tortillas, eggs. All right, optional sliced jalapenos or hot sauce for extra heat. vegetable oil, chopped onion in a bowl. Beat the eggs with a pinch of salt and pepper. Pour the beaten eggs into the skillet with the onions. Gently stir the eggs with a spatula until they start to set, about 2 to 3 minutes. Add the chopped tomato and cilantro to the eggs. Continue stirring until the eggs are fully cooked, about 1 to 2 minutes. Meanwhile, warm the tortillas in a dry skillet. Divide the scrambled eggs evenly amongst tortillas, shredded cheese, top of salsa. Okay. I don't think that there's any like new issues that I see. So anyway, kind of going back to the assignment readme. So we ran the bottom synthetic queries. What we just did is called open coding. And so we're basically just trying to identify things that we see. And now we could define the taxonomy. And so based on all those notes, we can define basically a failure mode and then go through and tag our examples. And so in here, some of the common things, there's obviously the prep and cook time not being kind of clearly there, or the number of servings. We have some cases where we might be just giving always like a cuisine omelet rather than like a traditional breakfast in that style of cuisine. I like the things where like prep steps are kind of interleaved into the cooking. And so that's something that I kind of would want to press to replicate more of. And so all of these things that I'm calling out that I've maybe seen a couple of times, those are all things that kind of become tags. And so over here, I might even, do something like tags. And then I might do something like, if you haven't done a lot of stuff with spreadsheets, you can basically add data validation. And so I might want to make this a drop down, or I don't know if there's a way to do like a multi-select. Now that I think about it, there might not be a way to do a multi-select in this. I think there's some way to do it. I forget how to do it, but I don't think it's like super important. But one thing I might do is like tag this with prep time, or let's say cook time. And that would be a failure mode that says like, hey, this didn't say anything about the cook time. And then another failure mode, num servings. Basically all the examples would have that, which is why it doesn't make sense to like really tag it with that. And then I might also tag this with refusal, because it refused to answer the request. And so basically, as you go through your notes and you figure out like, okay, these are the different tags that I want, you would then go through and like start to add the tags here. So I'm going to wrap up on this. And someone pointed out that there's a deep dive on homework 3 in 3 minutes that is officially part of the course. So yeah, I think this is a great time to kind of just cut. But yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks for tuning in. Let me know if there are any questions you have on Twitter, LinkedIn, Discord, or wherever you found me. Thanks.